Good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, good evening, everyone. Hope you've gotten some food. At your places, each person should have a yellow folder with a number of documents. One, the agenda, two, an exit slip, and then also on the left side, two sets of meeting notes from the 3rd and the 7th that will hopefully get approved once we have at least 13 members to approve them. On the right side of the folder, you'll see an updated deliverables timeframe calendar of where we have been and where we're headed in the next couple of weeks. Additionally, you will see draft notes from the community forum at Grant High School from the 16th. You'll also see a draft document which has the draft set of values that were created of the subgroup, which was Hector, Sasha, Judy, Pamela, and myself. You all got those in email yesterday. And then and Joe Zender, thank you. And then the last document is, and we'll get to it later, which is an overview or just kind of a preliminary document that has some of the survey results regarding some of the questions that will hopefully guide the values discussion tonight. And just as a reminder, on May 28th, we'll get a full update in terms of what the actual survey results were from John and staff, John, Jim, and others next week. So just as a preliminary, that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So I just wanted to walk through what the agenda for tonight's meeting is. We've got 3 objectives for tonight. One is to do a debrief and get some shared thoughts regarding the community workshop that we had on Saturday. 2, get an understanding in terms of what the initial survey results tell us and how we'll begin the work to incorporate the survey results as one piece of information into the values framework that we'll create in the coming weeks. And 3rd is we're going to work through the values document tonight and continue the discussion of the boundary review framework elements. So that is the overview agenda for this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Jim, who will handle the public comment portion.
All right, thank you, Jason. We have 2 people that have signed green cards to provide public comment. And as usual, we have our 2-minute timer, and we'll have Dave Porter go first, and I will, he has 2 handouts that I will pass out as he begins.
Okay, thanks. One handout is my 4 recommendations for values, and I will say, I see you have F up here on diversity and demographics. I am in emphatic disagreement with that, how that is currently worded. My other comment, it has to do with, from a prior paper you used the wording educational excellence, and I wanted to expound upon what that would mean to me if you wish to carry that forward, and I'll read part of a second paper. First, dual language immersion programs are better than English-only programs, so that the drive for, quote, educational excellence should include the expansion of dual language immersion programs. Recall that research shows that dual language immersion students learn everything as well or better that English-only students learn, plus a second language, plus added cognitive skills. Second, I urge thinking about educational excellence in the terms laid out by University of Oregon education professor Yang Zhao. And I'm going to skip to just one paragraph that I highlighted on that. To prepare the challenge for the 21st century, we need to redefine excellence in education. Instead of effectiveness in homogenizing students, an excellent education should support the development of diverse talents. Instead of suppressing creativity and individual differences, an excellent education should deliberately cultivate them. Instead of preparing compliant employees, an excellent education should intentionally encourage students to be entrepreneurial. Instead of overemphasizing global competitiveness, an excellent education should foster a global perspective and competence. Excellence in education should thus be measured by its effectiveness in providing personal education that promotes diversity and creativity on a global campus that engages students in global interaction through product-oriented learning that inspires entrepreneurship and innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave Porter. At this point, Brooke Cohen, please.
Yeah, wherever you're comfortable.
Hello. There's one thing I think everyone can agree on. This committee is here to find a way to balance enrollments across Portland's public schools. Pervasive under and over-enrollment is unhealthy and unmaintainable, and it negatively affects our children's educations. The solution on the table is to develop a framework for determining when boundary adjustments need to happen and how to make them in a way that is consistent with our equity goals. The trouble is, boundaries are inherently incompatible with equity. PPS boundaries turn school assignment into a commodity. They allow people with means to buy guaranteed assignment to the school of their choice when they purchase a home. They partition Portland geographically and intensify stratification. Aligning school boundaries with any equity policy is deeply contradictory. It cannot be done because boundary systems support inequity. The good thing is we don't have to accept a boundary-based framework any longer. We don't have to concede to a system that leads us into a state of imbalance and inequity that pits neighborhood against neighborhood in a tyranny of us and them, inside and outside. The soft neighborhood framework rejects a tyranny of boundaries. It is a big change and one that we need. Another good thing, there is a fairly straightforward, principled way to dynamically adjust school assignment as needed. This is the nature of the soft neighborhood model. It is designed to automatically adapt to shifts in population. It's a dynamic system. Year after year, whatever unpredictable changes occur, the system adapts. If there are more kids for a few years in one concentrated area of the city, nearby schools will accommodate them. If there are fewer kids in some area, nearby kids will fill in the gap. It's elastic and fluid in the same way that populations are. What more, the soft neighborhood model is designed to be an instrument for increased equitable access to our public schools. Boundaries offer a guarantee and a special privilege to people with more resources. The soft neighborhood model erodes that privilege. Boundary adjustment, even if done frequently, does not. What it does instead is create zones of predictability close to schools and zones of uncertainty in the margins between schools. Those who have the means will avoid the zones of uncertainty. The soft neighborhood model has no such zones. Everyone shares the ineluctable burden of uncertainty. This committee represents an opportunity for meaningful change. Let's take it. Think about what can and cannot be done with boundaries. Consider the possibilities and understand the limitations of the task set before you. Does stabilizing enrollment improve equitable access to educational opportunities? Yes. Does eliminating boundaries erode an impediment that has historically stood in the way of equitable access to educational opportunities? Yes. These are things we can fix. Let's fix them.
Thank you very much. Anyone else with the green card for public comment? Okay.
All right, Jim, thank you very much. All right, next up is going to be John Isaacs to lead us in a debrief of the May 16th community workshop. John.
Jason, do we have time to do meeting minutes? Minutes? No? No minutes?
Let's do that.
Let's just do, okay.
So first of all, disclaimer, I've been home sick the last day and a half, so.
You sound horrible.
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to thank everyone who came to the workshop on last Saturday. It went, I thought, very, very well. I thought it was a very rich discussion, and I really, really appreciated the engagement from all of you there. It was really great. So what I thought we would do today is go around, and we can just start here, and if you weren't there, this is one of those ones where you can ask questions when we're done. But I want to go around and have each committee member who was there. There's two things I want. So one thing we're going to do today is try to get to some sort of shared outcomes or shared takeaways. And then I want to know from each of you, just really bluntly, what you thought was, sort of the strong points, or at least one strong point about how we organize the event. And then if there's an improvement you think we can make for a future workshop, because we're going to be doing several of these in the fall. It'll be a little different because we're going to be looking at family map proposals. So I want to get from each of you what you thought was a strength, what you thought was a weakness, and then what you thought was like the key one or two takeaways from it. All right. So, and then we can have a discussion, if the time allows, for 30 minutes, because that's what we have on this, right? Okay. And then I also do want to say, we got the notes, the video is done, and we couldn't get it out to you right away because we had to do some editing on it, but by the end of this meeting, you'll all have it in your inbox, and I really encourage every committee member who was not there to watch it. Yes?
The link is on your webpage, so if you open
Oh, it's already
the
on the webpage,
boundary,
great.
the boundary review webpage, the link to that and all the videos is right there.
Excellent. And we'll email you directly the link as well, so you have it, all right? But it's up, and then it's available now to the public as well. Okay? So Jason, why don't you start us off?
So, one of the good things from the forum for me was I actually heard from a family that had one kid that went through an elementary, middle, then a high school framework, and then the same family had their younger child actually live through the K-8 conversion. And so he was able to illustrate for me the fact that while his daughter actually got to do the science lab experiment at the middle school level, his son at the K level only got to read about the experiment in a textbook. So it helped illustrate for me, even within one family, the impact that K-8 versus middle had within one cluster. And so I think unpacking like whatever we choose to do around that configuration issue, it illustrated for me how inequitable it became between families. So that specific on the ground was really powerful for me. I think one of the frustrations I had from that group discussion was, as much as I loved I had a mix of a parent from King, some parents from Skyline, and then some parents from Scott. What became challenging was I loved hearing the different perspectives, but the families weren't hearing each other. It was always about while I appreciate your side, it was, this is what's happening to me, and that's what's important. And so it was important for everyone to actually get their perspectives out there, for the fact that they weren't actually having some sympathy for each other to really illustrate how things are just different between schools, for me was just both eye-opening and frustrating for me as a member to hear, and just like, our job is to be dealing with everything as a system. And so that was the big kind of like frustration for me as a member, is like, how do I work within that, knowing that it was just so blatant.
And one sort of takeaway?
I think one big takeaway from this is, really getting people to illustrate the why an issue matters to them, and that was really good, and we need to continue to do more of that. Why is the decision we choose why do they feel it's an important, good thing, or a bad thing?
Okay. Who's next? Kim?
Michael? Oh, you weren't here.
Michael's not.
Never
Well, yeah,
mind.
you don't need to talk in this interview.
Sorry.
Actually.
You caught me with mouth. I think one good thing was having no experience with this, it gave me an idea of what to expect. So some perspectives. One thing that was hard was I don't believe that a lot of the people in my group understood that we're trying to create something for all of our kids. Yeah, same thing. And then I think we needed to, if we could do something better in the future, it would be getting the word out sooner and better. The takeaway was, this is very complex, and I got to see, like, it's gonna be very emotional and very stressful. Duh.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, I really enjoyed the group I had. I thought that the conversation was really rich and that people were listening to each other's perspectives, but there were a lot of voices not in that room. So except for Dave, it was all women, and except for one woman, it was all white people. And so I didn't think there was enough diversity. I also didn't think the forum itself had enough people, period. So to your point, what could we have done in terms of outreach to get more people there? for 4 hours on Saturday.
Yeah.
You know, it's maybe we could have broken it up more effectively, I don't know. But, the thing, I think the piece of information or perspective that was reinforced for me, and it may be that I'm only retaining that because it reinforces what I already thought, and so I have to check myself on that, was that people really care about their neighborhood school. I mean, that came out really, really strong in our group, is that people really want the school and the neighborhood to be connected.
Michelle?
Me, yeah. Sarah and I are in the same group, so, do you want me to just? Yeah, we can do it together. Our group, actually, we thought was, pretty good in terms of the diversity across, like, geographic diversity, and some racial diversity, and some economic diversity, and, some people that were not yet in the school system, so that was interesting. I think 2 out of our 10 or so were just in the discovery phase of all this, so that was pretty interesting to see their fresh perspective. And I thought that everybody did a really good job of listening to each other and understanding that it was a we process. So that was good. We didn't really have to struggle with that. And we really let them do most of the talking. We talked a lot about programs. I felt like we talked about that almost the whole time.
Programming between K-5 and
Yeah,
K-8.
and maybe that was partially because there were some people not in the system and so there was just a lot of people explaining how things work from their perspective, but also listening and sharing just some sort of system stuff.
I was impressed, equity mattered, and they really, talked about that, and especially in the context between what K-8s could offer and what middle schools could offer, but they were holding not just my child, but a bigger, that it's not okay that some kids are getting something and others not.
Okay.
The one thing specifically, somebody said it would be nice if there was a map at the meeting or in the room while we were.
There was a what?
A map.
Of the schools.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe because some people didn't even know where. We had a lot of people from Scott School and then Bridal Mile. And Beach. Yeah. So we got really a good span. And, any other improvements or anything?
Okay.
So Joe and I did the same group together, and I think a strength of our group, I mean, we had, definitely diverse geography, diverse socioeconomic. We had parents from Beverly Clear, we had a parent from Chief Joe Ockley Green, we had some parents from the Lincoln Cluster, we had a parent from Winter Haven, we had a parent who doesn't even have a kid in the system yet, so we had definitely a very diverse group, but it was pretty split that we had a group that some people really knew what was going on, and some people were like, oh, I'm just here to, so which was okay, because I think that they were able to then do stuff that Joe and I didn't have to, they were able to kind of fill in some of the gaps. Really strong around looking at equity, not only equity of programs, but racial equity and making sure that things are being done in a really thoughtful way. They felt very strongly about that. And then also when we got to the K-8 middle school question, I love them, they wouldn't even vote on it, they're like, we're not even doing, and we had a middle school student, which was a great opportunity to provide some perspective. They wouldn't even take a vote. They're like, nope, we're just gonna talk about it, and it was nice, because they're like, nope, we're not doing it. Like, they just really wanted to hash out some of the bigger stuff that was going on. I felt like it was definitely much more up here than down, like, at the numbers. So it was it was a very broad conversation. I would say for me, one of the weaknesses was definitely, I wish we'd had more people there, and it was very white. So for me, it would be more diversity and more people. I don't know what our final number was, but it would have been nice to be leading a group of like 25 and not 10. Or even 20, it felt like, I think the thing that for me is that this is such a big decision, and I know we're gonna do a bunch of meetings in the fall, but I feel like it's a lot of the same people every time, so how do we get to more voices?
So that's a good description. We had a really good group, I thought. We had sort of an equity bomb in there.
Yeah.
That sort of set that tone. That's what's important right off the bat. And so, you know, some of those, if I walked in there and I wasn't part of that, I would have gone, ooh, okay. So, but that's okay. I think the discussion worked. 2 observations. On the K-8 middle school, they wouldn't vote. But their message was, whatever, do it right.
Yep.
Whatever, like we don't know, do it right. And then the second message was that they felt the need, and this is from experienced people and new people, to go remind the history. And the history was about not doing it right.
Yeah.
And that's the legend. Like, I'm not quoting facts because I don't know, but that is that's like our, that is something, that's our proof point and legitimacy point to overcome. And like I say, I don't even really know the facts, but that's what's burned into people's memories. So whatever we do is going to be judged with all our good intentions being fine, but the follow-through isn't there. And so I'm not really sure what follow-through looks like for us, but that was the 2 things.
And trust.
Trust,
Definitely.
lack of trust came up in ours as well.
Lots of lack of trust.
The other thing is that's related is people not being that comfortable with wanting to answer the questions on the survey, saying, you're forcing me to choose these answers. And I was really quite like, I'm sorry, but the whole point is that we want you to choose.
Yeah.
And they did it, and we got them to vote. But they were really, there was pushback. Well, this survey is, I don't like to have to do this. Welcome to our world.
And I can, right, I think I can speak on behalf of those of us who helped design that. That was intentional, with the trade-offs for people to have to grapple with, so that's interesting. I
So
think
Margaret was there too.
But we want it all, we want
Margaret,
the
oh,
K-8
I
and the
apologize.
It's all good. I was eating and stuff. Gave me time to think. I appreciated Sheila's fabulous facilitation. She did a great job, and I just got to take notes, which was awesome, so I could listen, like it's helpful to, so I don't know sort of design-wise, like how we wanna do it, and I don't know how it felt for Sheila, but it is helpful to be a listener, and facilitating and listening at the same time is hard, it's a skill.
Yeah.
So I would just say, I don't know if that's there's a strength to facilitating from being in the group, and there's a strength to, anyway, I appreciated having the time to take notes, so thank you for that.
You took great notes.
And I think that the other piece, so there is a piece about history that's really interesting, and I don't know how we frame it. So there's a piece, one of the issues that, there were a couple of issues that were surfaced that you start to go down a path, and it seemed like this was kind of like, oh, this is how it plays out, and then all of a sudden it would take a turn, like, oh, no, this is really how it plays out. And, so like class size was one that was interesting. So like how does that, like what's the right class size? And what do we mean by, so these are big words, right, that people are interpreting. And how does that play out? How does class size affect programming? How does it affect staffing, all those pieces? And then I think there was this piece about change, right? Like it was discussed pretty explicitly, like how much change? What does that mean? Are we worried about change? If we change structures, how often? What is the impact? Does it matter? Who does it matter to? Does it matter to who is most affected by it? Kind of played out, and then there was this tension between, well, this is how it would play out for my family, what I value, and this is how I think it plays out for other people. And I think it's that dynamic that is very hard to manage. And so thinking, I'm thinking about how do we help. It's very similar to the work we do with, like, as a system. So there are times, like as a teacher, where I would serve on district-wide committees, and you'd be really thinking about, okay, here's what my experience is like, but we're like making a decision for the district overall. So like a textbook adoption committee or something like that. So you have to go from your localized experience to more general, and so you have to really be mindful about how you help people make that transition. So as a principal, it's similar, like there'll be things that we sit down and just say, how do you advocate for your building? What does that look like for your specific situation? If we're making a district-wide decision or system-based decision, how do you get other perspectives and how do you balance other perspectives, knowing that you know yours so well, right? And so I think that was a similar issue that we saw with families too, is that you speak from your experience, which, is one of our conditions, right? And also then, so where does the generalization come from, I guess, is in how to help people balance those two. And part of it, at least from previous conversations, would mean that in that space, you have to be very intentional about having a lot of different perspectives, and that's how you get there. So you speak from your own perspective and you listen very intently to others. So I think thinking about how we create those forums that is very mindful of making sure that multiple, that the perspectives are there, and really, one of the racial equity questions is, what's the missing perspective? And I think we have to ask that question constantly. So what voice wasn't in the room, what perspective was missing, how did you get there?
Okay. Judy, did you want to?
Oh, thank you. No, I was, except to say, I thought, as facilitators, note takers, I thought you were all amazing. And that I know everybody would have been there if they could have, but for those of you who couldn't be there, your colleagues showed up well, and I thought set a really good standard for community members on what it means to engage with people in this committee. You were serious. You did your jobs really well. When you reported at the end, it was thoughtful, and I was really proud of to be a part of something where you guys showed up so well. So. And I thought John's team did a great job of being on the ground and making it happen. That's what I thought. So.
And then Judy also had a presentation, a slide presentation at the very beginning that I had never seen before, so I think it was new. And I think it was really helpful.
Okay.
It'd be good to see what other people thought, but I thought that it was great for the general audience to explain really some really basic dynamics of how the school system works, and that it helped later on, so people could then at least have some context of where we were.
Agreed. That's good. Thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, and I had a chance to see it afterwards, and I think it would be great to make the PowerPoint available to everybody here.
Okay, I'll post it on our website as part of what we put up for the meeting.
And encourage everyone, to me, the way we had to do the video, sorry Joe, I'll just say this real quick, is you get the opening as just an uncut video, and then because everyone broke into separate groups, we had Brian go through and record, 7 minutes in here and then 7 minutes in here, so that's where the editing, so you get a snippet and it says, group 1 discussion, and you watch it, and it goes to the next group. And then the end is again uncut video, and that's where the facilitator of each group went in and said, here was our key takeaways. And what was important about that was you had the groups affirming that you all, the committee, yes, that is basically the general discussion. And it was a demonstration that you, as a committee, really did hear what the discussion produced. And so I thought that was really a good way to do it. That the committee said, here's what we heard, and it was affirmed by those in attendance. So that's also on the video at the end. Joe?
Well, just in one other observation, there came a point in our discussion, and we had a pretty knowledgeable group, so the level was pretty high. And there was a lot of it was just frustration with understanding what we were doing and where we were in the process and what's with this survey and what's its purpose. And so we had to take just a momentary pause to say, D-BRAC, we're just setting values right now. Like, this is where we're at. I know you guys are in all these other places, but please just know that's the discussion we're having. And it would have been, it just made me feel the desire to say, and we're gonna go here, and we're gonna go here. Not in terms of the conclusion, but in pieces, explain the logic of the thing.
That's good to know. Did anyone else get that in their groups? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that people seemed really, really frustrated with was they wanted an answer about grade configuration.
Okay.
That was something that came up over and over and over again. So, we need to know what's going on. The other thing that came up that has been in my mind, because it's been mentioned a couple times, and I'm curious if I'm alone in this, but the whole thing about we're not touching the high school boundaries, your explanation was good about that we're focusing on the K-8s, but I guess I'd like to know, and this is a ways down the line, but it'd be great to have it recorded down, is that, does that mean that those are hard and fast, and it's literally only the K-8 that we're looking at, or because that kind of frames what we're doing? So that's a question in my mind, and it was a question brought up
Okay.
quite a bit.
Okay.
Can I just, I'll be as quick as I can. I think one of the reasons it's hard to answer that question right now, like it's easy to say, this is where we're starting, this is the focus, but people want to know how far it's going to go, and what you hear over and over again, and what we are well aware of is that high schools matter. It doesn't matter where you are in the system. People know those high schools, that's what they're working towards. Part of it really depends on where you guys wind up with values and what the board endorses. So if one of the outcomes of this is that the very highest value is that kids move together in cohorts for as many grades as possible, then that's going to have an impact on when and how we make changes that get all the way up to the high school level. Can you see the relationship between them?
Yeah, no,
So
your explanation.
without
helped.
landing where the values are shaking out, it's hard to say how high schools factor in. And so taking you back to where you are in your most important stage right now, the outcomes of this will determine, to a certain degree, how our work is prioritized going forward.
Okay, thanks.
Margaret?
Well, one of the things, so, and it surfaced something that, it reminds me of part of the discussion that happened, in our room, was the values so much shift as you go up in grade level. And so one of the things that surfaced was that it was really important for people to feel close to their elementary school and recognize that really equity may happen at the high school, right? That it may not happen in the local setting. So the elementary may be too small a piece, and that as you get larger and larger pieces, well then, yes, you can talk about, and when I mean equity, I'm gonna restate this, that you would end up with more heterogeneous population than, in terms of a number of different factors. But then really, ideally, when you're looking at a localized, and you're saying, if the highest value is walking to your elementary, then, yeah, it's gonna be your neighborhood, right? And that is, and that you can't shift. And so, there were things that came up, like, okay, this is the value we hold here. It shifts a little bit as kids develop. It's like almost as if the values develop as kids go, right? And so I thought that was a really interesting, process, and I mean, it changed how I looked at some of the pieces up here, and it's, so, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was about some of it was about safety for little kids, comfort for little kids. But then, I hadn't really thought about the fact that the middle school system actually introduces kids to a greater diversity of people around them. And so that might be good for some kids and maybe not so good for other kids who maybe aren't ready for that yet. But they didn't seem to be as concerned about things like kids getting to school as they got older.
Or if we're not ready, if kids aren't ready for that, how do we get them ready for that?
Joe?
So, that was a really good observation, both of those, because they make sense to me just personally. And I think they relate back to what we heard about wanting some sort of clear definition on K-8 versus middle school, right? And we're talking boundaries, so I don't have an opinion on K-8 versus middle school that's relevant to D-BRAC, And so, that's just me, I'm just speaking for me. And it would be great if, as one of our premises, and maybe we already have said this, but that for our purposes now, we're not messing with that, we're designing a system that can work in a system where you have K-8s in middle schools, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, there's a pedagogical, there's other reasons to rearrange that, but we're not gonna sort that out, or I don't think I will sort that out. And the same thing's a little bit true of the high school end too. It's not that they aren't huge important issues, but if you set those two parameters, then we've got a little more clear field to work with on how we apply our values to making decisions, because, so, if that's possible.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes, and I wanted to see if there were any questions or.
Yeah, I had a question about like, a couple of statements about if kids weren't ready for that. I'm not, or if some kids weren't ready for that. I want to kind of explore what that meant.
Let's see, what did that mean? Well, there was a lot of discussion about whether kids, it was important that kids felt welcome in their school. And I guess that was me interpreting that maybe that meant that some kids wanted to stay closer to their friends. I mean, you know, when they talked about the little kids, that it's important for them to be surrounded by community, maybe as kids get older. But there was one person who talked a lot about the importance of having continuity as you got older. And I guess that not ready for that was my interpretation of what she was saying.
Any final comments or questions?
I don't know, Margaret, if you had a different take on that.
There were some interesting, all I would say is that there were just interesting sort of, it shifted as people had students that were getting older, what became more important shifted. And that created a tension point, I guess is all I could say, is that it's like, so how do you balance that? And I think there was I think the voices not in the room are really important to consider. There was a lot of conversation about K-8s that we talked about, and family dynamics and how that relates to a K-8. It was interesting, we didn't have enough time to tease it apart, honestly, to really hear to get underneath what people were saying about it. So I think it's, anyway, I mean, there were some good starting points. So there was just a series of questions I kept writing down. Like I kept saying, can I ask a clarifying question? Can we come back and talk about what you mean by program, or what do you mean by class size, or what do you mean, like, can we get underneath some of this? And I think that that's part of, I mean, it just left me with a lot of questions. It was great and stimulating, but I don't know how to resolve that.
Okay, Hector, last comment.
So I had a wondering also, when you talked about are kids ready for it? Are they ready for more diversity, more equity, whatever? I'm gonna share with you, and maybe you could share it with everybody else. There's a great article about a private school, and actually a private school system back east, that's having courageous conversations about race in the classrooms. And so it's very instructive, very informative, and they're not using our model, although they do quote Glenn in the article. But it does talk about, so one of the conclusions is that the kids are more ready than the parents are. So I'll just say that.
Okay, so I want to just wrap up with a couple comments. So I do want to let you know, so I did get some feedback from Misha, who's not here tonight, that she felt like we needed to arm all of you with some stronger talking points to talk about the district's racial equity policy and PPS's focus on racial equity and closing the achievement gap. So we're going to do that for you. I just want to let you know that that was feedback from her, so since she's not here, I want to make sure you know that. Second thing I want to let you know is that we had at least one school who left with one community that left with the impression that in the communications that we got, that decisions have already been made about them. And so, as you know, that's not the case at all. I mean, So we're gonna go to a meeting out there next week, the principals parade, and we communicated with the PTA president, just to help them understand the process and what the role of D-BRAC is and talk about that. So I just wanted to let you know that communication came in to me, and I think Judy got some of that. And then the last thing is on June 3rd, so date for everyone, June 3rd, 6:30 to 8:30. At Madison High School is when we'll be doing the workshop with the Coalition of Communities of Color. A lot of you expressed a desire to hear from a much more diverse audience, and that's what you will get at that session. That session will be totally different, because we'll put it together with the coalition and really let them drive how we do it, so it won't be the same thing, although I will bring some of the strengths I thought worked here. In particular, I thought it was really strong that we didn't put people into clusters, that they got the random number, and so it broke people up, so they did hear different perspectives from around the community, which I'm taking that away, frankly, for all community sessions I'm a part of, for all topics in the future. And then last thing I'll just leave, this is food for thought for all of you. I can tell you now, having done, I don't know, between 40 and 50 of these this year, when we do sort of the open, a lot of people have commented that it was mostly a white group. And I'm just telling you, I can predict that, as will always be the case when we do a session like that, that's sort of at a high school, we open it up to the whole community, and that's just typically what happens. There's just by far enough of a pattern, but that is just, for me, as the chief of community involvement, a forum, a way of designing a session that is very accessible for white families, and it's not typically accessed by families of color. So I'm letting you know, our staff, our team, this is gonna be a big topic of discussion for us on how we can improve the way we're doing community involvement to make it more accessible for a more diverse group of families. So I'm just letting you know that, and it's food for thought for when we do our community involvement later in the year. Scott?
So one of the takeaways is not enough people there, period.
There's between 50 and 60 people on Saturday.
Yeah. So we're, do we feel like these two sessions are enough? If not, then what?
Well, how many people completed the survey?
I was gonna say.
4,100. We have 4,100 tickets.
That's a lot.
If it were our only piece of feedback or input for this, I would be concerned, but the fact that it's basically just piggybacking on the survey, I don't feel worried.
I just had a quick question about the feedback that you got about the school thinking that decisions had already been made about their school. Did that happen as a result of the session?
We're gonna try to dig into that when we go out there. I'm not clear.
Okay, and then my second question is, will that be the response for any school that comes and says, we think you've made a decision? Because that's an equity issue.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, get your question. Yes, I will let you know from the staff, yeah, if we get feedback that there's been a major miscommunication with any school who says, we think this is happening to our community, you haven't told us, definitely. We're not just going out to this one school because it's that school. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. That's all right. It took me a second to register that, Sarah.
Can you clarify on the third, our role? Are we just listening, or are we facilitating?
I can't
and
say.
how hard should I try to be there? I guess.
Okay, so I
Another
would
time.
really
I know.
encourage as many committee members as possible to come to this, okay? And while I can't say, I think you should expect you'll play more of a listening role than the last one. Just, that's my experience. Jason, is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be more of committee listening to community dialogue, facilitated
Which,
dialogue.
don't get me wrong, is very important,
Yeah.
but I know you needed us to
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
on Saturday. But I think I can miss my PTA.
Okay, last thing, I'm gonna get out of here.
Yeah, so this is more of a clarifying question for me. I feel like I'm a little confused about the role of this committee in the middle school debate, and I've heard some messaging that it's sort of gonna be a D-BRAC solution, and then I've heard in the past that I thought we weren't, it wasn't really our job. I don't really know where we are. Like, are we, as a committee, supposed to be giving you, our opinion about that? And who's deciding that? I mean, I'm really sorry to have to ask that. I'm really confused.
Because you kind of implied Carol was gonna give us that.
I'm kind of confused. So I kind of would like to know that, just
I felt put
for
on the
my
spot
mapping
with
of my
the public,
future.
like we were making the decisions.
It
ourselves.
would be
Not that I know of.
really nice if there's an FAQ to clarify.
Yeah. 'Cause
What
it's kind of
actually
a
is
whole
happening
different
and who's
process.
actually.
I asked that because I read in some board meeting materials, some summary that said that D-BRAC was gonna be working on that, and I didn't really know that.
And it's a big piece of the survey, and a huge number of the people on Saturday felt very strongly and were giving us their opinion about it, so I guess what do we do?
So, here's what I'll say, before you're done with this piece of your work, we plan on coming to you with some analysis about K-8s versus middle schools, and how that, and how it relates to building capacity. As far as, you have not been asked directly to weigh in on that question. You as a committee could choose to do so because you're a committee advisory committee and you can weigh in on those. If you think that's a value, you should. That's your decision as a committee. But I think I think we're gonna give you information about that will help you in terms of your values-based framework. And then it's very likely that the values-based framework will have a great impact on decisions the district may or may not make about K-8s versus middle schools. Okay? Is that-
Okay, yeah, the biggest.
But you're definitely, I can say this committee is not deciding or making a recommendation about which one is best.
Okay, here's the thing though, is the question
Not
that,
being asked to do that, I guess.
the question that keeps coming up, and I agreed with the people that were bringing it up, is if there is a change, how is it going to take place? And what time frame? And I guess as a committee member, since this directly affects our work, I'm really, really frustrated. Because I don't think that there's any transparency in how the decision's being made. I had to find out by having a direct conversation with Carol on where it was at. And I just feel like we should be told, since this is such a major part of the survey that went out, that we should know where it stands. And, you know, we keep having to ask about it,
Where what?
When a decision's going to be made.
K-8 versus middle school.
Yes.
So
It's
what
getting
we've said,
frustrating.
what we've said, and I understand your frustrations, let me, because it's taken a long time, and it's an essential question. You knew that the day you walked in the door. If you didn't know it, you knew it before you walked out the door. And you've done a good job of suspending the need for that information for the most part, and then you go into a public setting and you're like, oh yeah, they're saying what we said 6 months ago. And so I understand the frustration. What's been happening is a great deal of staff work to bring some data-driven analysis so that when the superintendent comes forward with a statement about configurations and how she wants the configuration of schools to be incorporated in the boundary change process, she's got data to support it. And we don't have decisions, there's no decisions that have been made. The data itself is still in development and doesn't lead to any specific conclusions. It's taken a long time. And because it's taken a long time, it leads to the frustration. But what my expectation is that the superintendent will have a statement about how she believes grade configuration should be incorporated in the boundary change process as it moves forward. And that will be if it's ready in advance for you to hear and know from her before she shares it with the school board. Is that about where we are?
She said that it would come before you're done delivering your recommendation, so I
Okay,
mean, we're.
but again,
Yep.
I had to bring this up to get that information.
But I have said to you, we're working on analysis and the superintendent's gonna have a message about it.
I
And
know.
every week I get a little closer to knowing what that means. If I had known more 6 months ago, I would have told you.
I I'm still worried about how it's gonna roll out though.
So would
You
it
can
be
share that.
adequate and fair for our work, just to say, we have to design a boundary policy recommendation that works no matter how this is configured? Because the configuration decision's got a logic and a reasoning that's gonna land on us, and we need to have a set of boundary policies that are transparent and based on these values that can deal with that sort of bump in the system, because it sounds like that's where we're at. That's kind of a clear place to be. It may not be adequate for folks, but I think that's where we're at, right?
So Jim,
I
I think
wanna-
you better take over.
So our next agenda item is to get a sneak peek at some of the results from the survey. We were going to start
Wait a
that
second,
12
what
minutes
just
ago.
happened to his question?
So this is what I'm posing to the group is, I want to make sure you make an intentional choice about how you want to spend your time tonight. We can continue to talk about this a little bit more at the risk of not being able to talk about our values and also some preliminary feedback from the PPS survey. Or we can set this aside, knowing that we've got time for the next 28th, 4th, and 11th to continue this conversation. Jane?
I want to make a motion to extend this discussion another 10 minutes, to amend the agenda.
So everybody's got red, yellow, green cards. We're gonna use them a lot later in this meeting, so you may as well get them out. So everybody would like to, so we see 2 reds, a whole lot of greens, and a couple of yellows. So I think we're gonna go with the tyranny of the majority on the greens here and extend this till 7:54.
6:54.
Sorry, 6:54. I haven't looked at the clock twice and I still misread it. So 10 more minutes on this topic to 6:54. So, Michael.
I agree with Joe. Something's gonna happen, we don't know what's gonna happen, and we just have to do the best we can to come up with a process that would allow, whether they choose to go with K-8s or K-5s, we have a process for how do you move boundaries.
So Jason and then Kim.
So, I'll just personally express my frustration as chair in that this membership has asked for that level of information since we started convening in November. So every month that question has come up, people have testified on that question. It is one that has at some point, where I've actually met with individual members, either it's coffee or lunch or breakfast on the weekend. And it is the one thing that I have personally made sure to talk with members that if that question is not answered sufficiently, the committee several members have expressed to me that it will be difficult to really move this process substantively and keep the trust of the group. Now, I will say, as a person who has done all of those to try and keep the membership together, the fact that we're now in mid-May and this question still comes up is frustrating. As a person who's doing all that in addition to trying to run the committee to the best of my ability, as far as I'm concerned, we're getting close, less than a month till we meet with the superintendent, and that question to date, we don't have an answer. Now, I will personally be willing to say, I'm okay with, get to the 11th with the assumption that there will be a recommendation before us. But for me personally, if there isn't something of substance that answers that question so that the committee who is donating their time, where they could be with their kids or anything else, that's a major pivot moment for the district to deliver so that we can do the job, so that we can help our kids. So as far as I'm concerned, this has been out there since day one, and we've gone for at least 4 months without a comprehensive answer. So for me as an individual, I'm willing to wait until the 11th until there's a decision. But if there isn't something substantive by then, I'm doing everything I can individually, in addition to weekends, to hold this group together.
Kim, and then Max. And then
I hear
Pamela.
what you're saying, Joe, and in theory, it sounds really great, and I think for the most part, we could come up with framework and things like that that works. The one area that really gets me is the access to strong programs, because that looks entirely different depending on which direction you go. It also drives, facilities. And so that's where I struggle is how, I don't see how we move forward without knowing. I mean, yes, I agree that we can come up with values, we can agree on them, we can disagree on them, we can discuss them, but, on the ground, without a decision, it's pure ignorance, I don't know how it will work.
So Max, Pamela, Alice, Michelle.
Well, I don't remember who said it, somebody talked about, just the community's, belief in just having the process done right, and it's just really hard for me to think that we're doing it right when we're designing something for a system that we're not sure about. So, yeah, I just think that, like, that whole situation just, like, starts uncertain and it ends uncertain because we still don't know what the decision is gonna be. So while you can make one for both, it's not gonna be, I feel like it wouldn't be a quality one. And if we're trying to do it right, as opposed to doing something that we think will work, I just don't know, I have trouble seeing how that's gonna work out.
Thank you, Pamela.
So I guess my two comments are, I agree with Joe that we can keep working on a theoretical basis. So what are our values, what are our desired outcomes? We can get a certain way down that matrix, but as we start running scenarios to understand the implications of what we've done, that to me is where whenever that date is, and I think it's coming soon, when we start looking at this, if we don't understand what the configuration is, we're just looking at, we could play it both ways, but it's still so much ambiguity. And then my other concern is, I think in my ideal world, boundary change and configuration change and other changes would happen as simultaneously as possible, because what I hear from the community, so I'm not very change averse, but what I do hear from the community is constant flux breeds lack of trust. And so I think I hear I feel a concern that if we change one parameter and then we come back and change another parameter, that we're undermining trust, which is sort of at the foundation of what we do. And so I think that's a little bit where I want some clarity sooner rather than later.
So Alice.
Well, there's a ideal part of me and there's a practical part of me. The practical part of me says, frustration aside, I don't think we're gonna get an answer right now. So I think we need to move forward with Joe's recommendation, with what everybody said about yeah, we can try and make it work, but at some point we're gonna need that. So I think that needs to be communicated to Carol. And I think we also have a leadership opportunity here that the value statements can then indeed inform her decision.
Exactly.
And I don't think we need to miss that opportunity. And if we say that that those things are important, then that may help her make her decision.
Thank you.
So, can I
4
just-
minutes left.
That was
So-
me, and I brought it up, so I just wanna clarify why I brought it up in the first place, which was ideally, what I would wanna know was what everybody else on the committee felt about whether or not they wanted to have an opinion, a formal opinion on whether or not we're having an opinion about this. Cause I would like to go with Joe and say, we're generating a framework. I don't wanna give my advice on what grade configuration should be as a committee member. But the reason I brought it up is because I've been recently hearing language that maybe D-BRAC will have an opinion about that and help with that, and I don't wanna help with that, personally. So if we could vote, maybe everybody else really wants to get more, I don't know when we would do it, but engage more on this topic and have an opinion. But I think it's outside of our scope. So maybe we could vote someday on that.
So 3 minutes left, Shannon, and then Sheila, and then Joe, since you were lead off, you can clean up. Shannon.
All right, I'm gonna be fast. I think the thing is that hearing everyone and the frustration and where we are, and I mean, I think we're showing a lot of patience. What I keep hearing from the community is what Pamela said, is that we have botched this as a district a few times, and they don't trust us. And so when I hear this, well, maybe we're gonna be part of the K-8 middle school conversation, maybe not, but we keep asking the community, and then when it comes to us and we're like, or we're like, we're waiting to see. One thing that was said in our group is that there are people within the PPS community who really believe that the district has made a decision, which you guys got some of that information, like you had some people say that, and then we're just kind of the window dressing. And so when this keeps coming up, if I'm a conspiracy theorist, I'm gonna keep going back to that and saying, well, look, this is happening. So I think that it's really important that if we're gonna do the grade configuration, we have to talk about it, have it cleared up, because if we don't know what's going on, or we're not sure, it really starts affecting the trust of the community. And people are already gonna be mad at us when this is done. So, but then if they're mad at us and they completely don't trust us again, we've just wasted a whole lot of people's time. So I think that it's really, we gotta, I mean, I have faith that it's gonna happen, but we have to be really clear about how we're doing it.
Sheila, and then Joe.
So first, I would like to understand better what Jason was saying when you talked about, I wasn't actually I'm not sure I understood what you were saying. And the reason that I wanna understand that better is to Alice's point about, is there a point at which we take a leadership position on this and say we can't do any more work until we have that answer? Or, I mean, so maybe you could clarify what you mean by that. Are you gonna make a demand? Are you gonna?
Sheila yields back the balance of her time.
What? Yeah, I'm gonna give it back to you.
Okay.
The Honorable Senator.
I would like that one. So I guess the honest point for me as a member was, individually, we have put in a lot of work to try and understand the system. And what I've heard from members individually is that you want to make the absolute best informed decision possible. And I've heard from a number of members over time that there are key inputs you need in order to make that decision. And there are those inputs where you have asked for them over and over, and you have not gotten any version of a sufficient answer. And for me, trying to lead this group, and when I'm in meetings with staff every other week, it's this case of, like, I'm trying to keep the membership together because you guys have done phenomenal work, but I'm doing the best I can in good faith to make sure that, to keep you all focused, and that we're gonna get something good, strong, and comprehensive done that really sets the stage for how the district can do business. But also for me individually, it's a frustration of, I don't wanna keep calling individuals every other week and saying, I know it's gonna come, you're gonna get the information, and feel like that I'm inherently lying to you. It's like, oh, it's gonna come, you're gonna get it, and then another week goes by and haven't gotten the information you've been asking. So there's only so much I can ask people to be patient and hope that it'll come. But for me as a person who's been doing a number of those individual reaching out, it's getting exhausting. Because I feel like I'm wasting your time and saying, it's gonna come, it's gonna come.
So is that a message you're going to convey?
That's a message I would personally convey if I had the opportunity, absolutely.
Tired truth teller. Over to Joe.
So, the frustration Jason just expressed, and I've heard from a lot of you, I really sort of appreciate, like, okay, because in a little bit, I'm here to serve, you know what I mean? Like, I'm here to try to make this impossible thing we've been asked to do work.
Absolutely.
And that's what my chair has been trying to get us to do. And what's leadership look like in a moment like this? One thing it could look like is us saying, if you can't define what our scope is, here's what we're telling you it is. And if that's wrong, please get back to us, but then we can just move on. And so what I would propose, and you know what, Kim, right?
Yeah.
Kim, what you said about the programming, that needs to get on our values board. That was spot on. That was spot on, because that's what people are worried about. That somehow when you monkey with the boundaries and the way the funding works, you can't get adequate options to the middle school, but it's like a zero-sum game. Does it have to come from the K-8s, and do the boundaries have any role in that? That's kind of what I heard, right? People want the programs to succeed at the end of the day. If you're gonna do a K-8, you're gonna do a middle school, you designed it to work. We're talking boundaries. So we're gonna design boundary principles that work with that, what you described as one of our values or our outcomes or our principles. So it's sitting there, and if the district can't solve for that, we've built at least a policy system that's gonna make that transparent and sitting there like, you know, a smelly chicken. So, so, you know, like for emotion,
I just
it-
gotta highlight something.
in the spirit of motion making, what if, I would make the motion, and we're not voting, but that we're gonna say as our charge that we're gonna design policies that work independent or complementary to a, whatever you call that, a system configuration system, systems configuration decision that's made independent of our work, because we're not gonna make that decision. We're gonna have a boundary system that's looking at that and maybe work with it.
So say your motion again in one sentence.
D-BRAC's premise for designing a recommended boundary policy is that it will be designed to work complementary to, but not drive system configuration decisions.
So based on what Joe just said, green if you really like that, yellow if you have some questions or reservations, red you dislike it. This is not a blood oath, this is just a straw poll, seeing where the group is. Lots of greens, fair number of yellows. Thank you, everyone. So I appreciate Jane making the motion to have us go a few minutes long, and I hope that by extending it 5 more minutes, didn't make it too much worse.
And I'd like to summarize what, very quickly. So we heard things that we appreciate that you took time from other things to say, and to the best of our ability, we'll communicate to all the leaders who are involved in this project. There's a lot of internal intensity around this as well. And and now they will be aware that there is not just external in the big world intensity, but intensity with the group that we've asked to come together for this. So you helped distill that intensity in those moments. We're gonna pass that on, and our commitment remains to answer the question, as John said, in tandem with or prior to you making your recommendations. If we had it tonight, that's all we would have done.
Okay, so next, thank you, Judy. Thank you for the group for engaging in that. And it's clear there's a lot of frustration, and it appears there are some paths forward. Want to change gears to our next agenda item, and this is going to be really brief because this agenda item will happen again next week in much more detail. This is an initial quick answer. You've got a one-page, two-sided in your packet on a couple of key questions that were forced choice ones. So in a nutshell, there were 4,100 survey responses, 4,100. 22% about were paper responses, the rest were online. So that's about 750, I think, paper responses. So if you went to a public meeting, you had 4,100 people there, that'd be a lot of voices. So we have a lot of voices. These are question 3, 5, 6, and 16 from the survey, and you can see the question and the results there. So just take a moment and look through that.
Interesting. Right?
Wow.
Just like that.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Some of you may notice that n doesn't equal 4,100. That means not everyone who took the survey answered that particular question.
Jim, are there crosstabs on this so that we can see?
There will be next week.
Okay, because like
I mean,
on the, you know, crossing busy streets, I'd really like to see that broken out for, is that elementary, middle, high?
Right, right, yeah, and next week you'll get a full report and with answers to all the questions and crosstabs in a whole bunch of ways. But this is what we could get from DHM right away. It got emailed to me today at like 3:45, so thank you to Janet for making copies. So let's do like 2 comments from somebody we haven't heard from tonight, if somebody like that has a comment. And otherwise, I think we ought to move on to our larger content item. Hector.
So, first of all, I think this provides information not just for us, but for Carol, right? The whole issue about grade configuration. So I'm happy about that. And I think I'm intrigued by this already. I can't wait to see all of the data. But this, along with the information we got from the community workshop and the information I hope we get from the next one, I think is really going to help get us to where we want to go, to what Joe's been calling for, which is having the values that inform the framework, that inform how we do the boundaries, so that regardless of the grade configuration, when a recommendation comes to our group, we can say it does or doesn't meet the values that we ended up on.
Scott.
Down the line, will we get disaggregated data? And is there any way to sort of weight the data so that it's a little more random representative as opposed to whoever shows up, shows up?
I don't know. If Wendy Willis were standing here, she would have an answer for you, but she's flying back from East right now. So, but Wendy will be here next week to go through this in a lot more detail with you. So at this point, what I think we want to do is shift to our major agenda item for tonight and our
Just on closing that one up, was there anything in particular that you either heard on Saturday or that you've been wondering, now that you see a little bit from the survey result, that you want to make sure is that you get a breakdown or something on? If Jim hears it now, there's a good chance that it'll get back to you next week. So and if you think about it on the drive home, you can always email him, right? But
yes.
Just one last call for any other level of detail about survey results. You really get a good shot at seeing them next week, but if you think about our timeline, there isn't a whole lot of time to come back to you with further details after that. So that was just a call for, if you're thinking something, that you just check with Jim, make sure that you've got that request in so we can get it done.
I guess my request would be to get the results as soon as possible rather than waiting to hand them out at the next meeting so we have time to think about it.
So my hunch is DHM will be, because what we've asked them to do is a lot of work. And my hunch is they will work on it till 3 or 4 o'clock next Thursday. Email it to me, I'll get it to Janet, and she'll print it out. Now, as soon as we get it, I mean, I of course asked them like 10 times this week, when do I get that, when do I get that? So, and again, this is where you'll have this information, we'll talk about it a bunch next week on the 28th, and it can help inform our discussion on the 6th and the 11th as we move forward. So let's shift gears to our next agenda item. And what I'm hoping is that, well, I'm sorry, the subcommittee people, can you put your hands up just so you all know it's not me and my imaginary friends doing this? Pamela, this is where you put your hand up in the air. Thank you. You're one of the subcommittee.
You're one of his imaginary friends.
So, Jason, can you give us a little bit of an introduction, and then Pamela is going to help us read through these. I'm giving you a quick process of what we're going to do for the next hour and 10 minutes. hour and 5 minutes. Jason will give us an intro, Pamela will help us read through this, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for you to do your own thinking. And if you want to make specific changes to language, write them on your sticky note and put them up on the walls for the ones. And then we'll have a larger group discussion, and we'll go through these one by one with taking the group's temperature with the straw poll, yellow, green, red. So those are the steps of our process that we'll go through in the next hour. So, Jason.
So, thank you very much. So in the last couple of weeks, Joe, Pamela, myself, Hector, Sasha, and Judy have been working hard in the interim between the 30th and yesterday to take the preliminary value statements that you all developed on the 30th, and then they presented to you on the 7th. And then all of you provided feedback from the meeting on the 7th of what you would change or improve. And so what we all decided to work on in the last couple of days was to really figure out how do you combine a lot of the similar themes and distill them into clear thematic statements that would hopefully be clear value statements that we would hopefully review, and that hopefully in the next couple of weeks we use and adopt as the values that we use to eventually start looking at policy language, to eventually design the framework that we're hoping to present in a couple of weeks. So this is after a month's worth from the preliminary discussion that we had on the 30th, and it will continue to adjust a little bit depending on the additional information that we get back, but this is an increased distillation, if you will, of the value statements that you all have started to form. So what I wanted to do is just to give everyone a couple of minutes just to read through them. We sent them out yesterday, and so I know a number of folks had a chance to read through them and identify areas where if you were green, awesome. If you were yellow and had some questions, you thought about them in advance and would raise them tonight. And if you're going to be a red on any particular issue area, that I know a number of folks actually started working on proposed language that they would add to the document that would move them to a green. So the intent tonight is to see where there's commonality amongst the value statements, and then the areas or the few value statements that we have a number of tension points that we'll need to resolve. So the bulk of the time will be focused on not where we have agreement, but where we need to build consensus. So everyone will take the next maybe 5 minutes or so to read through them, and then after that, we'll walk through each one, I'll read them, and then we'll do a straw poll, red, yellow, green, to see where folks are. And then where we land in those will determine what the next steps are.
Where do we get to ask clarifying questions?
You'll do that when it'll be, you can raise your yellow, that'll be indicating clarifying questions.
Right. So I think maybe as we go to each one, are the questions? Yeah. 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 I think instead of 15, we start
So if you're making notes, just keep in mind that we would love to be able to collect any notes you have about language that you have questions about or you have ideas about, either because you're putting sticky notes up sometime or you're writing it down and passing it back to us.
more minutes.
I was just gonna read and ask for clarifying questions, and it's right on it, the red, yellow, and green tally. Well, I like the idea of you doing that, because you control the conversation a little better. Because this is, we're gonna go off the radars here, people feel sure that take time. Yeah. Okay.
So Jim, could either you or Jason say again what the next steps of the process are?
Yes. So we are at time for reflection and suggested answers, improvements, changes. So the theme here is we're trying to identify for the group what you already largely agree on and what it's unclear you agree on and will need to work on more later. So we're trying to sift. So these are preferences based on what you know at 7:15 on a Thursday night in May. This isn't a blood oath, it's not your final answer. What we're trying to do is sift. We're trying to identify where you are as a group, where you're all together, and where you're all over the place, and where you're somewhere in the middle. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through each of these, and we'll look for, if someone has clarifying questions, we'll have like 1 or 2 minutes each, because there's 11 of these, right? We've got like 50 minutes to get through all this. And some of these, I bet you the group largely agrees on, and it'll go really fast, and that's important. Let's save our time and energy for the ones that we're unclear on. So what we want to do is, we'll have Judy read it aloud since she's standing there. Any clarifying questions, put up your yellow card if you have one. I've got like a 1-minute timer here. It's a clarifying question, not a soliloquy, not a speech. The shorter the question, the better. And then somebody on the subcommittee can provide an answer to the degree they're able to. Also, a short answer, not a soliloquy. I'll have my 1 minute going. And then we're going to ask. Put up your cards, red, yellow, green. Hold them up, keep them up, and we'll tally them on each sheet. Okay? So Judy will read it. Clarifying questions, answers, cards, tally, on to the next. Process questions. Joe?
Amendments comes later?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We're trying to find out, we're trying to figure out what we need to have on the table to grapple with as a group the rest of the way, and what is off the table, because we're already in the same place.
So ideally, this part takes less than 30 minutes, so that we have at least 30 minutes to really discuss what could change. So keep that in mind.
So, and
I'm going to start now.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Any process questions?
Okay, so just want a quick out loud read. A, and these were not in prioritized order. A, equity. Racial equity is essential to achieve educational excellence for all of our children. Racial equity includes A, the elimination of the achievement gap and disproportionate discipline rates. B, an understanding of and acknowledgement of the history of inequitable housing and school policies. C, incorporation of the racial equity policy and application of the racial equity lens to all of D-BRAC's work.
Clarifying question, yellow card up. clarifying question.
So it has the wording there, the achievement gap. Are we looking at the achievement gap between blacks and whites, between Hispanics and other people, between lower socioeconomic and higher socioeconomic? It's kind of not clear.
Understood. Committee member, is there a short answer to that?
Yes.
Joe?
Well, you know, from this committee member's point of view, it's achievement gap as captured in the PPS sort of equity policy and priority. And so that really does, and I'm not, I mean, I can carry what I think it is. I know it's for sure racial and ethnic.
Short answers are better. Sasha?
So I would suggest the word racial achievement gap, and we look at a variety of data, and it changes over time. And so different historically underserved groups perform at different levels in our system in different areas, and so it's kind of a metric that we pay attention to. It helps warn us when we're going off track.
So the committee still has 30 seconds.
So I know we've talked about it earlier, but the other piece of data is the exclusionary discipline data that has a huge impact on graduation rates, success, achievement, all of those things. So that's another metric.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for green, red, and yellow cards. And it is fine to have a red card because you have some suggested language that you want to change or improve it. We aren't going to go through that language right now, but we will once we get through all of them. So, A, equity. Cards up, please. And hold them up. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I had another clarifying question, so.
Oh, I'm sorry, I never saw your yellow card.
I had.
All right, sorry. Second clarifying question.
So B was an understanding and acknowledgement of the history of inequitable housing and school policies. So I get the school policies and I think I get the inequitable housing. I'm just wondering why housing was in particular called out, because I think gentrification can be called, I mean, there's a lot of things, so I just wondered what was the thinking behind that particular.
A lot. So committee response, Pamela.
So, yes. And I think housing was called out because of because it was just, maybe it was just used as a code word for policy and gentrification that's somewhat driven by policy. It's just a shorthand for encapsulating all of those things, and maybe that wasn't the right thing to do, so thank you for calling that out. And then the idea, we had several discussions about do schools reflect the district or neighborhood, and the difficulty of achieving diversity given in a small elementary school, given those histories. And so that's why housing was called out to reflect those discussions.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay.
So are you making changes on the fly, and now are we voting on the revised
No.
wording?
No.
I'm just trying to capture the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, action, specific amendments are later. So, any clarifying questions? Jane?
Why, Margaret, if you're comfortable doing this, why would you vote no on that?
I have language amendments.
If you have language amendments, you're a red. If you have language amendments, you're a red.
That was my understanding.
Okay, whether it's a friendly amendment or an unfriendly amendment or a neutral amendment, if you have language changes, you're a red.
Okay, can I ask a clarifying question
Sure.
about that? So if you have wordsmithing, as in, I think, I support the direction of this, but if you said it a little more like that, I think it'd be better language. I more wanna know if people understand the spirit of it and support the spirit of it. This is not about the exact language. So to the degree that you could be like green with these edits, can we acknowledge that versus I have to be on red because I have 4 words that, now if they are like showstopper words, that's different. But if they're really text edits, so is that?
So
You gotta get to
maybe say wordsmithing is yellow. Okay? Wordsmithing is yellow, green support the spirit, red is you've got significant content change of words. Okay? Green support the spirit, Yellow, wordsmithing changes. Red, significant content wording changes. Cards up.
Don't get orange, Michelle. That's my favorite color.
Joe, that's not very helpful.
There's no orange in this room.
All right.
Oh.
Keep them up. Keep them up. So, one, Pamela.
So the committee is not
I'm
voting?
sorry,
She's
can I like not
abstaining.
vote? It's too, like, I did a lot of the drafting, like, of course I'm
Abstaining? Okay.
All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 greens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yellows, and 1 red.
And we will come back
And
to
we
the
will come
red,
back.
and if you're yellow for words, you hopefully are gonna convey those words to us in some form.
So
Moving to B?
B.
Thank you. B is excellence. Every student in PPS has access to a program that supports them to be reading at 3rd grade, ready for high school, on-time completion and graduation rates. Clarifying questions? Can we just see everybody with the clarifying question now so that we can hear the questions before we try and answer them? I see 3, Jim.
Okay, Max, clarifying question.
What defines ready for high school? I'm not
Okay.
clear on what that's identified as before.
Margaret.
I think that there is, I guess it's a clarifying question about, what's the question? I'm trying to pose a question, try to come back to me. I'm making a statement, I didn't pose it as a question. Give me a second.
Clarifying question, yeah.
Mine was Max's, so we shared the same.
Brilliant. Back to Margaret.
Actually, pretty
So,
quick.
so,
You can understand.
it's are we highlighting other change, or other, key transition points?
Oh, good question.
Committee, quick answer.
We pulled those from what, I think Jason and I looked at what Carol Smith said her top 3 priorities
Oh, yeah,
for
that's what we
achieving
tried to
excellence for students were, and we
Yeah.
put them in there, so I can't answer
No,
your question.
yeah, I do, I
think I
read
can
the same
answer.
thing, I just wasn't sure if anybody had exactly what that meant.
All right, Sasha with,
So those aren't the 3 priorities. The second one, ready for high school, is, it's the disproportionate discipline one that Hector raised. And so,
Can you speak
when I
up? I'm
first
sorry.
read this, sorry, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's
look.
already-
When I first read this, I thought it was the 3 priorities, but the second one's actually about disproportionate discipline and reducing that. And so if it's intended to be the 3 priorities, we should switch the middle one out. And then, so
We
Margaret's,
should put that in.
Margaret's question was, because that's a key transition point, ready for high school.
Mhm.
But there are other key transition points, so selecting one is kind of, odd. And I missed it earlier, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I've used the 3 milestones.
Yeah, can I put them?
What's that?
I've used the 3 milestones.
Not a clarifying question, but a good point to make, and if you go on red, because you think that would be better, then we'll come back and you can say that then, even though I just said it now.
let's go cards up. Green, yellow, red.
So if you have something substantive in this that you think could be changed to make it better, and you want to point that out, you tell us by showing red.
So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 greens, 1 yellow, and 1, 2, 3 reds.
Can I just, can I clarify? I'm sorry, I'm still a little confused by this process. I mean, we raised the question about what does that mean? It didn't get answered, but I'm saying yes, assuming that it's gonna come back around. Is that correct?
I heard the question, we need to define, can you define what ready for high school means?
Yeah, and so I'm saying green to this, assuming that that's what
Assuming
we're
that
talking
we
about.
define.
Thank you.
That we respond to the clarifying questions in reasonable ways.
Okay,
With better language that y'all are gonna help us get to.
okay,
Okay.
just wanna make sure that I was voting correctly.
I know this, and by the time we get to the end, you're gonna wanna go back and change your vote, I promise.
On to C.
We almost killed Sackett a few times with all these green. But you're a hardier person.
Yes, we did.
On to
Keep
C.
going, keep going.
All right, achievement. D-BRAC believes that every student, regardless of race, income, or zip code, can achieve and thrive at PPS. Clarifying questions.
No
Seeing
clarifying
none.
questions, cards up. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 greens. Max, are you green or yellow? I saw both. I need to ask a clarifying question.
Put it on your forehead.
And red, 1 red.
Oh,
No.
no.
11 and 1? You're taking
Yes.
it to be 11 and 1?
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Do it. You don't know who touched. I didn't do it.
On to D.
You guys are doing great. Access to strong programs, the heart of a lot of discussion so far. So, no student should be denied access to a strong core educational program because of enrollment conditions. The following program components should be provided in each school, independent of building size and number of students in the building. Core subjects, electives, appropriate wraparound services for students in a building so they can achieve excellence. Clarifying
Yellow
questions?
cards for clarifying. Jane.
The words wraparound services is government speak. As a layperson, I'm not an educator, so,
What does it mean?
I will,
Point
what does that
blanket.
mean, and what does that mean in our transparency to the public?
Okay.
Good question.
Other yellow. Sarah.
So can we, I'm asking, does enrollment conditions, can that include grade configuration?
Oh, I added that. I green that comment.
Alice.
Oh, wait, I had my own. That wasn't my.
Oh, I'm sorry. Alice. Then we'll come back.
That's okay, she can.
Are we going in a?
No, I was going with who I saw first.
Oh, go ahead.
Alice.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I guess, I think it's a question, I'm not sure if it's a clarifying question.
Just ask
Can I just ask?
Yes.
Just
Clarifying
ask it.
question. Ask the question.
So I'm wondering about dual language immersion because it has been in district priorities been listed as one,
Mhm.
and I don't see it listed here, so I just wonder if it was considered. There's a clarifying question.
Excellent. Michelle and then Kim.
I'm a little confused. Isn't this already existing policy? And so if it is, what can we add to make it a little more emphatic? Like, no, we really mean that. No, really. We should add no really.
For real.
No really. I mean, no, is it existing? Isn't, that's a question.
So, committee member has an answer.
So Sackett went through this also. In fact, we discovered there was a policy that if PPS followed it, would answer a lot of Sackett's
Right.
questions. So I think that's all we're doing, calling out here. That whether, if it exists, use it. If it doesn't exist, create it.
Okay. Well,
And it says electives, which is plural, which means they should have more than one.
Nice.
Kim, clarifying question.
My question is around the electives, because yes, 2 is not enough. So what about electives? How many? Are there particular ones? How is it decided which particular ones? I have a lot of questions around electives.
Short answer from a committee member. Pamela, your hands.
I guess yes, there are lots of questions around electives, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the subcommittee talked about this as, like we talked about, you know, this grade configuration. We're not the people who should decide the answer to which ones and how many and all of that, but we wanted to call out that we value that students have electives and an educator should inform our committee what that is.
And just to clarify, do you mean electives that students actually get to choose to be in that class?
Okay.
It should maybe be enrichment.
That's not a
I'm
clarification.
not sure that was.
Margaret,
It's on the record.
clarifying question, Margaret.
I just want to clarify what I
All right,
heard.
Pamela.
Is your question around the use of the word electives?
Yes, because that's thrown around a lot, and at most K-8s that I'm aware of, They aren't electives, it's here, you get this class, because we don't,
fair
because it
enough.
fits your schedule.
So the question is really, should we use the word elective or should we use?
I think we
Well,
should, because then it
enrichment
pushes
is another
enrichment.
term,
Okay.
that, but I think the,
I want electives.
you want the
Me
elective
too.
part of electives to
Yes.
be.
Beautiful.
But it is a
Yes.
choice. So our value.
No,
would be that
really,
they have
serious,
electives.
electives, seriously.
Right, so Margaret with the clarifying question, and then Scott, and then Alice.
I think we use language, so I wanna understand what strong means.
Right, that's
Or opposed to a
very
core,
nice.
opposed to weak, as opposed to like, I mean, so, I'm not sure.
Right.
So it's
So I-
language that we use that makes it, like, so it's a common term that is obfuscating, I believe, what we're saying.
Yeah, fair enough.
I look forward to your clarifying language that you suggest. Scott?
Strong core educational program, and then we talked about electives. Was that intentional to say strong core but not strong electives?
Can I ask, like, for the sake of just moving us through the rest of this, to say, like, what I'm hearing is that this is an important one, and how we define the pieces of this matter, and this is good starter language, but it needs more. And we can get to more tonight, but if we don't get to more, your hardworking subcommittee would like to hear some things from you to help define that more. Is that fair?
Yes. And specifically around what is our subcommittee is not, I mean, Sasha, do you need to tell us what the core program is, or we need a bunch of educators to tell us this, because me and Joe and
And it is
Jason
defined.
are not.
There is a
really
definition.
defined.
But the key element here is access. It's not, D-BRAC's gonna define a
Right.
program, whether it's strong or weak or mediocre, but whatever PPS is, it aims to deliver for kids. The size of, the number of kids in the building and the building size should not prevent kids from getting it. I mean, that, I read that as the, but to keep the heart of it, we have to get the rest of the language right.
I think I could help this a little bit.
Alice?
So, I struggle with my
Thanks,
last
no
question,
thanks.
but I don't know that I got an answer to it from the committee members, if they had considered Spanish immersion or dual immersion program. And then also, my other clarifying question is, did we talk about like equity in access to strong core? So it's no student should be denied, but did we talk about the same kind of access at each school? And then just a point of information, just because my kids are in dual language immersion, that automatically, if you are in a dual language immersion program, that becomes some of your electives.
You elected that.
Yeah.
In kindergarten.
But they didn't tell us that.
So I'm sorry that we
Okay,
haven't
so-
answered, that we haven't given everybody a chance to answer every clarifying question. If we can get all the way to K,
Yeah, at
at
whatever
least
point,
when we
yeah.
wrap
So, I mean,
back.
it's clear some of this group wants to talk a lot about. So we're successfully identifying those. What we don't know yet is for these other 8, whether the group cares or needs to talk a lot about them or not.
Their cards are getting twitchy, I can
So
tell.
let's do cards on D, red, yellow, green.
And
Cards
green
on
means we
D,
like the spirit.
green supports the spirit. So red, yellow, green, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 greens, 1, 3 yellows.
That was our strongest green yet.
That's.
Well, you guys
this is
also
going
talked
further
about
into
this.
what
Achievement was stronger. Achievement was stronger.
On to
But I think
E.
we have a lot of words for it there. What about healthy and safe schools as a value to drive the district-wide boundary change framework? Buildings should have appropriate number of students for the building size. Strong programs will not be sacrificed if a building cannot be healthy and safe and still economically support a strong program. Let's try and capture the clarifying questions succinctly first.
Yep.
We'll answer the ones we can.
So 5 clarifying questions. We'll just go down the line. Alice?
Well, I just kind of wanted to know more about what that last sentence means, like the buildings
What in the world does it mean? I got the same question.
I got the same question. I don't
Alright.
understand.
Sheila?
Same question.
Same question.
What,
All right.
same question, what?
What does the last sentence mean?
Strong programs will not be sacrificed if a building cannot be healthy and safe and still economically support a strong program.
Can't use strong twice in the same.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
so that,
It's
yes,
weak
not
to
all.
So,
Twice.
so let's not beat up the people who
Alright.
tried really hard to write things in a short period of time, but as you were writing it, writers, what were you trying to get at here, in other words?
So what we were trying to get at was that if there are small buildings that cannot safely hold 500 kids, that that those kids would still have access to whatever we're gonna say wraparound services are, in people speak, and electives, or whatever the other word is, enrichments or whatever, but because we understand that there are buildings that will never reach economies of scale, our value is that those kids don't have to sacrifice.
That's super helpful. I thought we were gonna leave our kids in unhealthy safety.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, let's, are we
with a
ready for
strong
cards
program.
on this?
Were there any other clarifiers?
No, all five have the same question around.
I had that same question.
So,
You're doing both.
yep, cards up, red, yellow, green. Cards up, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 green, 1 yellow, 0 red.
That won't last.
So on to F.
Because we're gonna talk about diversity and demographics. And this is how it's defined at this time, so contemplate this. Neighborhood schools should reflect, embrace, and meet the needs of the cultural, racial, and economic diversity represented within their attendance boundaries. For clarification?
We all love it. I love it.
Cards up, red, yellow, green. So, you guys just aren't voting much?
Well, I'm abstaining. I don't know what Margaret's gonna do.
Margaret's thinking.
I'm
Alright.
thinking.
1, 2, 3, 4, Sheila. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 green, 2 yellow, and Margaret 3 yellow.
Thank you.
I had a clarifying question though.
You did?
But you're on
I know.
You missed that here.
I'm sorry.
I need a quicker draw on the yellow.
Yeah,
Go.
sorry, no, it's, and I don't wanna take us off path here, but I'm not 100% sure what that means. And so I think it's worth teasing out a discussion. Like, I think I get the concept, but I think we probably all are carrying a slightly different version of it, right? So, but not for now, but that's, I think we need to come back to that.
I'd like to.
I'm like, phew, because I sent the subcommittee a really long email
right.
today where I was like, I'm just not sure that this what it means, what I thought it would mean about boundaries, blah, 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 blah. And then it was like 12 and 3, and I was like, I can't even ask my question now, right? Because I don't want to undermine good work, but I had questions about this one.
On to G.
Transparency. Okay, turning on the light. All enrollment balancing processes, including boundary review processes, should be transparent to all stakeholders. D-BRAC worked towards this value through broad communication with the community to gather input into the boundary process, review of survey input, listening sessions, specific outreach to traditionally underserved communities, communities of color, open meeting and video recording of all official meetings. Clarifying questions?
Yellow cards. Alice.
I like the part that we, want to be transparent, and so that's a value. I think the second part is just more a definition of our process,
Right.
not really.
It's not really a value, what we do.
Any subcommittee comments on that? Okay, any other clarifying questions? Cards up, red, yellow, green. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, Sheila. 12 green, 1 yellow. 0 red, sorry. On to H, predictability.
Boundary change will be predictable and based on the same process and criteria each time they occur. Boundary changes, plural, they occur. Process will be based on the values of equity and transparency. Boundary change is triggered to ensure access to strong programs and healthy and safe schools. Clarifying questions, there's a few.
Okay, let's go, Jane, Sheila, Margaret, then Kim.
To the committee, was there any discussion of adding that the process would include population growth and housing development projections?
I'll
So
answer
what
that, which is, in earlier drafts, we did have language that talked about specifically tracking things such as population changes, housing pattern changes, changes to zoning laws, as future outside conditions that the district should track in order to effectively, A, manage boundary changes, and using that information to determine whether or not boundary change is the appropriate lever for the district to use to manage an enrollment change at school.
Hector.
So I would also add that in reading this tonight, I had the same question that you did. Predictability doesn't feel like the right word here. So I'll just say that.
So
The
we
process, following the process feels right. In promising predictability, I don't think we can do that.
Sheila.
I was wondering whether this value would lead us away from ever considering the proposal that Brooke Cohen put on the table.
The
Probabilistic model method, the soft boundary method.
well, it's a predictable process, it just
Yeah,
doesn't lead to the
that's
same outcome.
It's probabilistic, yeah.
Margaret.
I don't know, I guess the clarifying question I have is around, is there space or language for regular review of criteria and process? So are we saying that this is something that it goes forward in perpetuity, or are we saying that periodically the criteria and the values of the community change over time? I think we're safe in saying that.
Yeah.
And will this process reflect those changes?
You mean you guys aren't trying to do something that's gonna last for 100 years?
Clarifying question, Michelle.
Is anybody gonna answer her question, or is that just a comment?
I think we're told to stop answering. I know.
If the question
if I
is
see-
there space to review criteria and process in the future, I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
I mean, if I see subcommittee members half putting their hands up, I call on them. If I don't, I move on. Joe.
And so then the question is, because we shouldn't lose that, it's not, it may not be a value, but it's one of our policies. Like, we need policies around that that say, we gotta revisit this and why.
Jim, can I add to that?
Jason.
So two things. One is when the PSC report came out that eventually structured this group, one of the long-term outcomes of that was eventually that both SACIT and D-BRAC were gonna merge so that it would be a standing group, so that the district, as it was managing long-term enrollment growth, that it would have a standing body that would do that ongoing monitoring. So that's part one. Part two has been a continuous discussion amongst a number of members in our subcommittee and in others subcommittees, like the one that Sheila, Alice, and Pamela and I were on a while back, trying to get to some point for a long-term approach that would set up a real framework for the district to say, when you have, an outside of normal enrollment condition happening in a building, if it's grossly underpopulated or it's usually overpopulated, really getting to a determination of, given that the district can do things like move a program, move special education classrooms, do a transfer policy shift, or do a boundary review change, that a long-term thing that could come out long-term is helping the district to clarify, based on all of the existing policies, when should the district use a certain lever to meet a particular outcome. So long-term potential, that could be a long-term goal that this group and others get to, is determining when is it appropriate to use a boundary lever change, when should they move a program, and to the transparency question too, what came up with, depending on whatever those levers are used, that the community at large will be able to understand, A, what the conditions are, B, under what criteria that the district used to determine which lever to pull, and from an equity standpoint, to ensure that if you have similar conditions happening in the multiple clusters, that if they're the same conditions, that the same tools will actually be used versus, on one situation, if they just moved to classroom, or B, some other community got converted, schools got converted from a K-5 middle to a K-8. So regardless of the cluster you lived in, that if you experience the same conditions from in one area and another, that you would get the same treatment in the end, so that everyone believed that the district was actually using the same policies to govern the whole system, not just a few who know how to access the building and the board.
Michelle and then Sheila.
My
Clarifying question.
question is about B. I'm wondering, boundary changes triggered by what? What are, I would feel like we would wanna have some language about a little bit about the criteria, or by a reference to a policy or something, because, it's too big for me.
And that's just kind of what you were talking about.
Which is related to what you were talking about, just at this specific point here.
Joe?
Yeah, and I need to think about that, because that's, but, you know, what I thought when I read this is, we just kind of repeated ourselves.
Yeah, I didn't hear when I
Because we've got a policy about, right, programs and policy, so boundary change will be used to do that, and it's the triggering is the word?
Is the
Okay,
question.
got it, thank you.
Okay, cards up, red, yellow, green. For predictability, H. One, Kim, are you agreeing? I'll
I
come
had a
back to you.
clarifying question, I got dropped off the list, but that's fine.
You get to be the first on the next list.
All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 green, 1, 2, 3, 4 yellow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red.
Wow.
We'll be
So we'll
talking
definitely
about
come back
this
to
one.
this one.
We'll be talking about this one.
And Kim gets the first comment. We'll come back to this one.
Yep. I, system understanding.
Boundary change is one of many levers to achieve excellent outcomes for students. Other related levers include grade and building configuration, definitions of strong programs and supports, plans for opening school buildings, enrollment and transfer policy.
Clarifying question, Sarah.
I don't, did you think about how these two are linked, H and I? And whether that would answer Jason's question, is to put them together on the trigger and put it in there.
So this needs, maybe should be one?
Yeah.
Alice.
I don't really see it as a value statement.
Right, it's a process.
And I also, I guess another clarifying question for me is, in the same way that we talked about, in our instance of spending, like trying, not suspending, but trying to develop a process that could work regardless of grade and building configuration. I wondered the same thing about those other levers, and we're pulling one, trigger a train wreck on the other ones, or so.
Actually, can I respond? Because I think that in this, I concur that I don't really know that these are values. It's, I think what we were trying to achieve was creating a parking lot that had said, that kind of, we kind of got to the same place that our group got to when we were talking the other day. Wow, there's all these massive numbers of unknowns, and if we don't acknowledge that we're thinking in a systems way, the district needs to think in a systems way, and these are the pillars that are right in our eyes, that we don't know the effect of what we're doing. So I actually concur that, I mean, it may not be a value, but it was maybe a parking lot, I don't know, of those things that, this is a system, whatever we do interacts with these other things. It's kind of what we're trying to do.
And what,
Maybe not effective.
what I would add to that is that we're still trying to tease out what are the differences between the values that drive the work and the outcomes that we
Yes.
expect from it. And so this may be more an outcome question than a value question.
Sheila, did you have a clarifying question?
No.
Margaret.
So I think one of the, and I don't know if it's about this one in particular, or as we're reading through and we're getting to the end, it's like, oh, this is a lingering question overall, which is, so like, how often are we, like, when we say boundary review, are we saying one boundary, or are we saying a cluster boundary? How many, like, is it, like, this is the, became a tension point early in our discussion, so I'm just not sure that I'm understanding, like, are we saying system-wide boundary review? Is it a specific local review, are we gonna apply the same principles locally to a system process? Like, what's the level of scope and scale?
I like it. I agree.
Okay, let's, cards on, system understanding. I, red, yellow, green. Two greens, no, one green.
Sorry.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 yellows. And Max, are you red there? Sorry. Scott,
Max, I'll work
don't
with you
ever go
after.
to an auction, Max. One red. One red. Almost there.
Can I ask a question
Oh,
about this
yes.
one before we move? The concept of the integrated parts, it's a system of integrated parts, and you gotta like pay attention to all the other levers even as you're considering moving one of them. Is that ideologically something that you want to state as part of this framework so that, I think that the idea was to have this framework not look like it's something that lives in isolation, but
that's
is
the value thing.
interconnected.
That is-
So if we were moving more in that direction, would that get people more, okay.
I think that's why you got a lot of yellows.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So let's go on to J, strong and stable school capture rates.
Are a primary driver of resource allocation to provide strong programs. D-BRAC, you guys, support strong capture rates at each school. Is it, so there was a lot that came up in the values conversations in the last 2 meetings about capture rates. This is the direction that it's gone in now, clarifying questions about where it's at now.
Do we
Sarah.
need to define capture rates? I mean, I'm kind of going back to Jane's comment of who's reading this, and does everybody understand what capture rate means, I guess?
Right, and here it's actually defined as at each school and not the overall
Right,
district.
but
Right,
yeah,
what's
so
the
then,
capture
then,
rate?
the kids who live there are going to that school, I mean, right?
If you live, yeah, yes.
The kids in PPS.
So it needs,
live there.
Right, the kids who are in.
So,
Kids who haven't opted out.
I guess we should define.
Scott, did you have a question?
Is this an outcome
Yeah,
or
so
a
write down
value?
the definition.
What was the question?
Is this an outcome or a value?
Mhm.
That was the question
Oh,
Scott
yeah.
asked.
That's a good question.
Jane, your brow is furrowed and you have a yellow card.
Yes, because my question has to do with a stable capture rate being the driver of resource allocation. Is that to say that if a school has a poor capture rate, it's not going to get equal resource allocations, which then does that not put it in conflict with
Right.
language earlier in the document?
That's good.
Lots of head nods from committee. Was it Kim that had one? Michelle?
Problem that I see with the individual school capture rates is that they really are dependent on how large the catchment is. And so they don't exist in isolated, like, just a school that has a 40% and a school that has a 70% could both be at capacity in the building and have a strong program. So it's kind of complicated.
Joe and Sasha.
Well, and I sort of asked this of the educators in the room, is our target really a system-wide capture rate? Because then the finances of the system work, and the perception and success of the ability to hit the outcomes is there. We're giving market support for the system, keeping our kids in it. And our other policies guide us to get the schools full enough of kids to get the programs, and so it's not maybe necessarily a per school thing, it's system-wide, we want to hit that 80% or whatever it is.
Sasha, then Pamela.
So I was just gonna do a clarifier around capture rate, which is aligned with what Joe's saying. It's not, schools don't receive less resources based on their capture rate. Their enrollment drives some of that allocation within the district. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a layered piece here, and capture rate actually has a very specific connotation, and I think this exceeds that connotation, and I'm also a little uncomfortable with the way we're attaching the financial piece to it, because it's not, in my view, the purview of this group to add, to have a driver based, you know what I mean? It just feels a little wobbly to me.
Pamela?
Yeah, I actually have a question about clarification of what capture rate is. It's the percentage of PPS kids who go to that neighborhood school, or is it what Joe said, which is the percentage of kids in a given area who go to PPS, right? Those are very.
So there's a district capture rate, and in the district, the whole district boundary, it's how many students who live within the district boundary attend schools in the district. And then their individual school capture rate. So Margaret School has a boundary, and it's what percentage of kids who live in the neighborhood for that school go there.
May I clarify?
Which kind of gets to, yeah, and I actually should.
And you don't even have to
defer
answer it.
to
You don't
Chris.
have to answer it. I just
No, I
wanted
think
to point
when-
out that I wasn't.
I want, just to help people, because I think it is the key point in this. One is the percentage of all school-age kids who live in the boundary and attend our public schools. And the other is the percentage of the public school students who live in any attendance area and attend that neighborhood school. So, one, like the smaller one, is a subset of the whole, but the whole is the question of how many school-age kids are out there going to school somewhere, and what portion of those come to PPS. We have a district-wide rate for that. Underneath that, each attendance area has the rate of those public school kids who are also attending their neighborhood school.
But those two rates aren't factored into each other to make the capture rate, they're different. They're two different capture rates.
The little ones add up to the big one.
But the
Not
big
according
one
to
is
what you
not,
said.
they're not combined.
But you're right, but what's not in the big one, you're right. The big one already excludes the kids who do not come to public. The little ones are all of the public kids. So if we have 48,000 kids, it's where they go and the percentage of those that are in their neighborhood schools. That's local capture rate versus district capture.
Clarifying question, Michelle, then Michael.
Are we trying to get to the concept of retaining and serving in our neighborhood school more than capturing? I guess, I think we need to come back to this thing.
I have the same question.
Yeah.
Mike, Joe, did you have a clarifying question, Michael?
Yeah, and I'll apologize up front, because I think it's a little bit more of a comment. The way I read capture rate is, when you have a low capture rate, that generally means those families with the means to go somewhere else leave, and schools with a low capture rate tend to have low demographics, low performance, and so on. And this is another term that's often used for white flight, right? You get a low capture rate, you say those who have the means depart the schools, those who have no other choice are left behind. And that's why I think it's very important to be included. That we do not want to make changes that would result in having a low capture rate of those who have the ability to get the heck out.
That's a red to his comment.
Oh. So, any other clarifying questions?
Well, I guess I'd like to know if capture rate measures that, because I don't think it does.
Okay, so I think we need more discussion around this.
But is it okay to just get a visual on conceptually whether you believe this is a value that should be included in the district-wide boundary change framework? Is this a value? Is this one of the fundamental truths that leads this process? We just want to see where people are. It's a bit messy right now, but to the best of your ability.
So, red, yellow, greens. So, 1 green, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 red, 10 reds. Sorry, I went out of order. 1, 2, 3, 3 yellows. On to K, strong neighborhood schools.
PPS is primarily a system of neighborhood schools. Strong neighborhood schools should reflect the diversity of the neighborhoods they serve.
So my clarifying question is, isn't that F?
Isn't it already on?
Agree.
Yes. Agree. Agree.
Clarifying question, so
Scott's got one?
It looks like Pam wants writing. So Scott, clarifying question.
See what you did there?
It's not a question, but my answer is no.
Ooh, really?
I think they're different.
Okay. Answer to Hector's question is no. Okay. Other
So-
clarifying questions?
So
Sorry.
if I could, we've got, this has multiple components in it. The first is, we are mostly a district of neighborhood schools. That's the first part. The second is, strong neighborhood schools should reflect the diversity of the neighborhoods they serve. So, to your question, the second part seems more aligned with F, the first part.
Which I think is what
Yeah.
Scott's
Statement
point
of
probably
fact.
Other,
That's a fact.
Yeah.
other questions?
Clarifying question, Kim and then Michelle.
Does this go to, sorry, going back to what our charges are? And maybe it came off, but early on it was talked about looking and reviewing programs and focus option schools and stuff like that. Is that still part of our charge? And that was originally in here, and I can't remember where we left that.
I don't remember that, but my question.
I mean, the committee
So can I
charge is
ask
on the
you
bottom
if
of the
that's,
agenda.
if that's a wondering that comes up when you read this statement, or if it's something that you need to clarify the intent of this statement?
No, it came up to me, with F and with K.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't see it just being boundaries, and then it made me think, well, wait a second, there was program review that was part of this as well, and I never knew it's not on there anymore, but, exactly. So now you remember what I'm talking about? Okay.
But it's not us.
So clarifying question, Michelle and then Sarah.
So, I am uncomfortable with the primary, it's like when people say Americans think this. I mean, there isn't the primarily, isn't it like 70% of people go to their neighborhood schools? Is that accurate?
Is that your clarifying question?
What is, how much of the system is neighborhood schools, is one question. And could we convert it into a value statement where we say we wanna promote the neighborhood system? Because do I think we have too much choice? That's a different question.
Committee members,
Okay.
thoughts on that question? Sarah?
So that's my question, my clarifying, is that the difference, that this value is that we value neighborhood schools, and F is different, that we want all schools, no matter whether they're a focus option or whatever, or not, to represent who's coming, right? Is that what we're trying to say? Because I think we're making it unclear when we say the diversity of the neighborhoods they serve. If we're just saying, we wanna have lots of neighborhood schools, cause that's what we have.
So maybe.
Is that what we're trying to say?
In listening to the feedback, on some level, one point is a statement of fact, and the other is somewhat repetitive. I mean, this is good feedback, so I mean, I wanna just take a second and say, like, I think the committee, when you have 4 or 5 people talking at each other for an hour and a half, it's really great to hear everybody's feedback and understand.
And you're not taking this as criticism, I hope.
Oh my God, no, this is like awesome.
That's not what I'm saying.
Please don't.
She's a masochist.
That too.
So anything else, just to clarify what these statements are about, and then we have very few minutes, but we need to at least summarize what the big points were and what we want to do about them.
Right.
So the quicker we can get a vote on this,
Red, yellow, greens, strong neighborhood capture schools.
and maybe at this point you're just voting on whether this is the kind of value that you think should be stated as a driver for district-wide boundary review. And if it doesn't have anything to do with boundaries, then you'd be red. And that's okay.
So 2 greens,
I dropped this.
5
Oh gosh,
yellows,
I've totally
6 yellows.
transposed the order here. That's what y'all have done to me.
2 greens, 4 yellows, 1, 2, 3, 4,
26 reds.
5 reds.
Did you count mine?
Yes.
Twice.
Uh-oh, wait a minute. Hey now.
Let's go for
All right. So that,
So how do they
having
get us-
done this kind of work with many groups, sometimes it takes groups 1,000 hours to do what you just did in 1 hour.
Yeah, you guys, that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
But what did we do other than
You
just say we have to go back
sit-
and talk about them all?
Right, and that's part of what the 28th is about.
We've set some future agendas.
Right, so from a process point of view, you've got, I mean, the key thing the subcommittee wanted is to have the whole group hear each other, ask clarifying questions about this, and get some guidance about, what we largely agree on, and then what we still need to figure out. And toward the end of a process, as you're heading towards advice to the superintendent, it's really important that we spend our time wisely on the 28th and the 4th and the 11th. So this has been a huge help to sort of narrow the focus, because there's a fair number of values we know now we don't have to spend a lot of time on because the group is in largely the same place. And there's some other really critical values that a lot of conversation needs to happen amongst yourselves to figure out if you can come to a place to give the superintendent advice on that. So so I'm going to keep talking for like another 30 seconds while Judy sorts. Jane, question?
I very strongly ask this of the committee again, that documents be dated, because we will be looking at several
thank you. That's a
versions of
great
this.
Oh, great.
And when we speak to it and we speak to the public, we need to know which one we're talking to. Or when the public is commenting to us, they may have an outbreak.
You have asked for that before, and
It's my
I will,
pet
I will help remind everyone. So, Alice.
I just wanted to make a comment that just like we talked about, or I think Judy made a statement about the system, understanding that they fold in on each other or inform each other. I think when we come to agreement about values, I think our values inform each other too. And I think having that, know where those one thing, or there's assumptions about one value that's based on if this, then that, that's gonna be important for us to figure out.
Scott and then Hector.
I think we can have a preamble to our values that talks about system stuff and anything else in the parking lot that didn't find a home in values, but is important to say, kind of thing.
That's a good suggestion, Hector.
So
and Margaret.
So I have a clarification for me and the subcommittee. I want to ask it out here though, for the whole committee to hear. My understanding now is that the subcommittee's charge is to try and take the clarifying questions and clarify what the basic or the basic value said, and then bring it back to this group for further discussion.
Yeah, we want to do another iteration. Margaret?
So I want to make sure that I understand what, the question was raised earlier, and I interpreted it one way, and now I'm interpreting it another way. So there was a statement about high school boundaries that was made earlier, but that is not part of this process.
I didn't hear that.
Okay, so that is not, so I misinterpreted, that's right then.
So what I heard Judy's is that we're not focusing on high schools, but the work that we do will likely have an impact on the cluster as well. But it's not our stated charge.
So I'll restate my question. We are not gonna consider cluster boundaries.
We are what, sorry?
Are not considering cluster boundaries as part of this process.
So Margaret, what I tried to clarify was that the degree that the values that you select to drive this process, like to the degree that, say, for example, keeping cohorts together, keeping kids together straight through is value, may determine how deep boundary changes go, whether they occur only in 6 grades or 9 grades or 13 grades. Because we don't have the values that are guiding the whole things like clearly laid out yet, it's harder to know how deep boundaries might go. But nothing is explicitly off the table. We have not said we refuse to look at, or we forbid you from considering high school change.
So we have 2 minutes. Let's go Michael, Kim, and then Jason, and then we need to wrap up a little bit. Michael?
So in response to Margaret's question, I don't think we as a committee are considering any boundary changes. We are putting together a framework, and PPS will decide that this year we're going to look at elementary schools, and 5 years from now we're gonna look at high schools. But the hope is we're gonna give them a process that they can follow for whatever boundary changes they're gonna be looking at.
Kim?
First of all, coming from the Jefferson thing where this committee came from, I couldn't disagree with you more. Because what was talked about was the fact that, the boundaries don't make sense in parts of the city. The other thing that I would say is that if we keep talking about the history, in my experience and in my opinion, there are certain parts of the city where it appears that boundaries were drawn to keep certain people in certain areas and vice versa. And I'm getting out of our committee that that's a big deal, that we need to not continue the status quo, that we need to examine our history and stuff like that. The fact of the matter is a lot of things in Portland are a result of racial discrimination. And I personally think that the high school boundaries need to be looked at, because I think a lot of things were done for certain reasons a long time ago.
Jason?
So getting close to the end, one thing I did want to make sure, because we got through all the clarifying questions, but I didn't get a chance to hear a lot of the proposed language that a lot of people drafted. So what I want to make sure we have a mechanism to do is we can, once we have got the draft, this language in a new Google Doc, dated the most updated version, plus all of the clarifying, I want to make sure that we have an avenue that we can put everyone's amendments in and make sure who's proposed what amendment, so that way everyone can see where we are. So that way it allows us to keep the work going
So
forward.
a quick question for the subcommittee members from a process point of view. Or let me do this first. Raise your hand on the committee if you wrote down at some point of the meeting specific language changes that you wanted to make to any of these. Raise your hand. Okay, so for those people that wrote things down before you leave tonight, can you physically put them on, and I've got tape here, physically tape them to the sheet they belong on?
Can I just?
Oh,
I
except-
just-
oh,
I
or
just-
you just
I
hold
labeled the ones.
Or just.
Perfect.
I mean,
Or give them,
just
Just give them,
turn them into me and Judy along with your pink cards,
How about if I email it?
or email it. But get them to us quickly so that the committee can have a chance to work with them.
Your subcommittee meets again next Tuesday at 10:30. They've done an enormous amount of work to try and get to this point, are intrigued by what you've shared tonight, and will do their best on your behalf to come back with something that you'll see next Thursday. Anything that you can do between now and Tuesday would be the most powerful in
Thank
terms
you.
of guidance.
yeah.
So some next steps to wrap up the evening tonight. Some notes I made, we need to make sure to date documents that go to D-BRAC. Judy's presentation from the 16th and the link to the video from the 16th event is going to be sent to you guys. Hector is going to send around that private school system doing the race conversations you mentioned. And the subcommittee is meeting, as Judy outlined. So some key agenda items on the 28th will be the survey results in a very full form, in a way, I mean, totally contrasted from tonight where you got a brief thumbnail on a few key questions. And then we'll go through the next iteration of this work that we did tonight. There'll be other agenda items as well. Jason, any last comments, observations?
No, I just wanted to say, this was a lot, and thank you all for really diving deep and getting specific to help us out.
And nice work.
Jim,
All
did you
right,
take
we are
the-
adjourned. Thank you.